I love how it has to say that. All right, so let me reshare here. Okay, so we're going to start shortly with the presentation from Susan Mercer, who we're lucky enough to have here tonight. Before I do that, I just want to give you some brief announcements about what's coming up for us, just let you know some job openings, and then I'll turn it over to Susan. And we'll wrap up with some questions at the end. And Susan's also going to take questions during it. She'll stop at different points during our presentation. So let's go in here. If you've never joined us before, welcome. We are the New Hampshire chapter of the UXPA. We are a small group if you're in person. Luckily, with these virtual meetings, we've been able to get a lot more folks joining from all over the world, which is amazing. If you want to be made aware of what we have coming up, just be notified of our events. We do have a listserv. You can find the link to it on our website, nhuxpa.org. We have a Facebook group, a Twitter, Slack. If you want to join conversations, we welcome it. We hope that you can join us. We'll be sending links in the chat window too. To all of these different ways to stay in touch with us. So I am one of the members of the board, Kyle Susi. We have Christine Fajardo, Cal Casilla, and Julia Gavin that are also here on our board. We are here to listen to all your recommendations. If you have a speaker you want us to get, a topic you want us to cover, anything at all, we're all ears. This group is for you. We want to try and make it as useful as possible. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any ideas for meetings, or if you yourself would like to present. We'd love to know. Our next meeting is going to be November 18th at 6:30 Eastern Standard. This will be a talk by Danielle Cooley, who is another fellow independent UX freelancer like myself. She is going to give a talk on the participants' well-being is your responsibility, which should be very good. I'm very interested in that as a researcher. So that should be great. And if, again, our email address is nhuxpa@gmail.com if you did have any suggestions for us for upcoming meetings, or if you yourself wanted to talk. Some other events that are going on, and I'm going to send links to these in the chat box after I turn it over to Susan. We have a Business X Design conference coming up. This is a new one for me. I have not heard of them, but you can check them out. It's going to be going on November 1st through 3rd. We have Humanity Centered doing a great half-day event that's only $15. It's a panel. I think there's going to be 3 different short panels, I believe, on November 12th. And their events, I went through their first cohort. It's a really great program. The speakers they get are always very passionate and a lot of food for thought, so definitely worth checking it out. The IXDA Interaction Awards are taking submissions right now, so if you're interested in that, you can submit. There's also awards for UX Design Awards that are open. Lou Rosenfeld for Rosenfeld Media has 2 conferences coming up. Civic Design 2021. This is their first Civic Design event, which should be really fascinating. It's December 8th through 10th. Again, this is all virtual. And they also have Advancing Research coming up March 9th through 11th. And they're accepting proposals for talks. So if you want to submit a talk, you can do so right now. And I attended this last year. I thought it was really well done. I think they're one of the few that really figured out how to do a virtual conference well. Sometimes it can be hit or miss, but I found it to be amazingly engaging, even though it was virtual. So they do a good job. There's this last one here, another one that's new to me, UX 360. They have a research summit that's happening February 8th through 9th. Their website is pretty bare right now. It's like the early bird where they haven't revealed much, but it could be worth checking out. All right, so job opportunities. There's a bunch. So a lot of these are remote. Rocket Mortgage is hiring like mad. And I know a few folks that work there that are really happy there. And it just sounds like they're just really building this huge UX team. So worth checking out all these jobs that are open at Rocket. Aptopia has a few, FedPoint, Nitro, SNHU in Manchester, if you're looking for something local to New Hampshire, looking for a senior product UX designer. So a lot of options. But I want to take a moment to see if anybody here has any jobs available that they want to mention, or if anybody's looking for a job, if you wanted to mention or put your information in the chat, please feel free.
Hi, Kyle. This is Mark Peterson. So I work at IBM Security, and we actually just announced a new position to hire a UX design lead for our Verify product. So if anyone's interested in that, feel free to reach out to me and I can give you some more information.
Great. And you can put your info in chat too. That's wonderful. Anyone else? Oh, we got someone putting it in the chat. Great. Well, feel free to add more in the chat if you would like, if you're hiring or if you're looking. Okay, and we wanted to take a moment real quick to thank our sponsor as well, Market Street Talent. If you are looking for people, if you're in need of UX folks, they do hire, have a great pool of people that they reach out to. And if you are looking for help on your portfolio, your resume, trying to get hired in this industry, they are great to talk to. They will give you some real honest, good critique on your stuff. They deal with this day in, day out, so they know really what people are looking for, what hiring managers are looking for. So marketstreettalent.com, you can look for them. And now just to introduce our speaker tonight, Susan Mercer. I have been very lucky to be able to work with Susan in the past. So Susan used to be a UX researcher over at MadPal, and I did some contract work with them and luckily teamed up with Susan, and we could do a little road trip around New England to see different participants all over, and that was a lot of fun. So I know how fun she is to work with. I know how awesome she is as a researcher. I know how lucky we are to have her talking tonight. And Susan, for anyone who doesn't know, she's been in this industry a very long time, over 20 years. I think it was 8 years, right, that you were at MadPal and then switched over to TripAdvisor, and now TripAdvisor working for a subsidiary of theirs called Viator. And there she leads the UX research team. And Susan got her MS in Human Factors and Information Design at Bentley University, and she also teaches there now as well, so kind of coming full circle. And I know every time that I talk to Susan, or I listen to a talk by Susan, I feel like I walk away as a better researcher, always super practical. And tonight she's focusing this talk on research reports. And I think it's interesting because a lot of times there's this trend, everybody's trying to get away from writing them. You might work in a team where it's just, let's get the results fast and furious. Let's have everybody observe. We all know what we observe. Let's go off and just change the prototype. That's great if you can have everybody observe. A lot of times we can't. And a lot of times we still have to rely on that darn report and we have to write it. So not all of us can get away with not writing it. And if you do have to write a report, what's the best way to do it? Well, Susan's going to share her tips and tricks along the way, some pitfalls to avoid, and I'm excited to hear more about it. So Susan, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kyle. Let me share my screen. I'm used to a different video tool. Can you all see my screen now? Awesome. So tonight I want to talk about telling the user's story through research reports. And I'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek about what we're going to be talking about. I started talking about writing this presentation about research reports. But when I came through and as I went through the process, what came out is all about telling the user story. So we're going to hit both of them tonight. And I chose this picture specifically as an intro for this because you can tell there's so many stories being made in it right now. You can see at least 3 groups of people in the foreground, plus a whole bunch more in the background, in front of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, probably on a vacation, maybe a vacation of a lifetime. What are their stories that got them there, and what are their stories that they're collecting while they're on their trip? And that's what I focus on with my team at Viator. We are an independent website, Viator.com, owned by TripAdvisor, and we sell tours and activities for travel. So I'm very lucky I get to talk to a lot of travelers, and you'll see a little bit of that theme coming through tonight. So as you know, Kyle gave me a brief introduction. There's my LinkedIn profile if you want to have a look at some of my background. If you want to reach out to me, feel free to reach out to me that way. And just to set the record straight, Kyle, you were kind saying 20 plus. I counted it's now 27 years in the user experience field. I have been focusing on user research for the last 11. So I was, as she said, I went to Bentley, and I was very pleasantly surprised to learn in the program that I could get a job as a researcher and they would pay me, because that's always been my favorite part. So I've been really enjoying the ride. And one of the things that I want to start with tonight is I want us to reflect on what is our goal as user researchers. Some of you are probably designers, but you do research as part of your job. What do you think is our goal when we do research? I want you to go ahead and type your responses in chat. I'm going to be watching the chat and talking a little bit about it, to know our customers, understanding the user, building empathy, learning the user's world. All great things. Definitely. We want to learn about users, but why? You know, and actually, I had an epiphany a few years ago when I found this tweet from Caroline Jarrett. She posted it in 2014. I think I discovered it about 3 or 4 years ago. So anything you do right on the internet stays on the internet forever. Don't forget that. But she had said that the user's researcher's fallacy is that my job is to learn about users. And to her, the truth is that my job is to help my team learn about users. Quite the difference there. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, it's not just me who has to know. I have to share that info with the team so they can absorb it. But then I started thinking about this in preparation for the talk, and I said, again, I want to help my team learn about users, but why? To what end? What am I trying to accomplish with that? And when I thought long and hard, what I got to is that I want to improve our product for our users. That's my end goal. That's why I want to help my team learn about users. But the other thing that goes on is I need to improve our product for users by influencing our team. For those of you that work in-house, and also for consultants, it's even more important. You don't, as a UX researcher, I don't have the final say in decisions that are being made about our product. So I can make recommendations, I can influence my team, but somebody else is making the decisions. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. How can we communicate? How can we influence and use our research reports as a tool to do that? So how do we influence others? There's whole books on this. I took a course on this for 2 days. Not too long ago from Norman Nielsen Group. Is it Nielsen Norman Group? I always get them mixed up. NN Group. It was phenomenal, by the way. But to summarize it for tonight, there's skillful communication is a core component of influence. We have to be able to communicate clearly and in a language that the audience can understand, so that we can convey what we've learned in our research effectively. So we'll be talking about that. And how do we communicate the user story? So I do want to make note to something that Kyle mentioned earlier. Sometimes we have the privilege of being able to involve our team directly in the research. If we can get folks out in the field with us, if we can get them to actually help us conduct interviews or site visits, ethnography, whatever method it is, the best way for them to learn is to really be immersed in that research. But that doesn't happen all the time. So another way that we can do this is to have them observe sessions. Sometimes people can't be there in person, but they can watch them via video, either live or in recording. And they can hear the user's story directly, and that helps them better understand the complexities and the contradictions, because we know not everybody says the same thing. But what happens for my team a lot, and I suspect others as well, is that we don't have that luxury either. I know I have a team that's very busy. I know that the majority of my product and design team is in the UK, whereas 3 of the 4 folks on my team are in the Boston area. So with time zone differences, they're not always able to observe sessions real time, even if we're doing them remotely. And that makes it a little bit challenging. And some people just don't want to observe. That is a reality we have. So what we need to do as researchers convey our stories through discussion and documentation. And I'll talk, obviously we'll get to the documentation part in a little bit. So how do we create good research reports? I think that there are 3 components to a good research report. We need to communicate what we have learned. We need to interpret what we've learned and communicate that interpretation to the audience in language they can understand. Basically saying, here's what we learned and what does it mean? And then we wrap it up. And I'm going to go through all of those different sections. In the communicate part, we'll talk about setting context and conveying learnings. Then we'll interpret to make recommendations, and then tie up the loose ends at the end. So telling the story, communicating what we learned, we can state our themes, back them up with data, and be as objective as possible. This is where my original training as a scientist comes through in my research practice. And then the interpretation. Understanding what it is that we want the user to be able to do, contrasting that to what we actually observe or hear, and then suggesting changes in order to get us to where we want to be. Any questions or comments before we move on? Feel free to type a question in chat. Either no one has questions or you're furiously typing long ones.
A quick question, Susan.
Yes.
So I noticed you kind of, and I've seen this before, you're kind of separating your insights, what you learned from recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen that and done it like that before too. Wanted to know your thoughts around kind of including those together. One thing I've found sometimes is that it can be really helpful for people to digest when they're looking at a slide and you kind of see the insight backed up by the data and have the associated recommendation right there to really provide kind of, a power-packed punch. So I want to know what you thought about that.
Great question. I see this more as a process. And yes, I generally have my reports in this kind of chronological order. I don't have a problem with combining them and communicating them at the same time. What I think we need to do as researchers, though, is make sure that we're very clear on what it is we learned, what's our data, and what's our interpretation. And if you want to package that and deliver it in one chunk, as long as they're labeled appropriately or it's obvious which is which, I have no problem about that. What I don't like to do is skip to the interpretation and tell people that without showing the data to back it up. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you.
Great. Well, why don't we talk about communicating? It's something we do every day, but sometimes we need to think a little bit about how we do it in order to do it a bit more purposefully. So to communicate effectively, you have to know who your audience is and what they need to know. And who is your audience? In my context, and I think most of us in the digital space, we have executives who are busy. We have designers who are busy designing and think visually a lot more and interaction. We have product managers who are sometimes focused on how to do things and what order to do them in and how to make sure things are going along on a schedule. We have engineers who are very good at making the magic happen, and when you push the button, the right things happen there. And I'm also lucky enough to work with data analysts who also look at user behavior, but from a very different lens of behavioral analytics. So each of these types of people, each of these groups of people, and your other audiences as well, have different points of view, different things they're worried about. And in order to communicate with them, you need to understand them. So I try to keep all of this in mind, as these are all the different audiences that I have for my research reports. So I write little bits of the report for each of them. And one thing that I've learned as well, coming from consulting at MadPow to working on teams in-house, is that our future UX team, our future product team is also an end user of my reports. I learned that the hard way when a couple of years ago, we had a reorg and I inherited a new function. My team used to work with our suppliers, the folks that operate tours and activities. And in January of last year, we focused to working with travelers on the website. So we had a lot of previous research that the last team did, and we became consumers of those user research reports. And there were times I found things that seemed to be a little bit missing a little bit, so that I didn't have the context that I needed in order to interpret it. So that's why I've called that out as a user for a research report, and you'll be seeing some of the things that I recommend doing and documenting for your future selves. And what do these people need to know? You know, the big things that I often get asked in my reports, you know, what are the key themes, particularly the executives? That's what they care about. What are the actual uses of our products? Sometimes my engineers ask that, and the product managers. You know, we're supposed to know that, but what do people actually use it for can be different from what we designed it for. So what are some of those actual use cases that we're learning? And our data analysts are famous for coming to us and saying, we've seen this behavior in the data, why are people doing this? So they're looking for that why behind the story as well. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to, well, what does this mean for our product design and what does this mean for our product functionality? That's where the interpretation part comes in. So communicating, setting context and conveying learnings. Setting the context. I like to start by talking about what is the business background? Why are we doing this research? What are we trying to achieve? What hypotheses are we investigating? What have we tried and learned before that didn't work? What do we think is different this time? And then for this particular research activity, what are the goals for this project? And I want to keep this to 1 or 2 slides. I'm going to talk about slide documentation in slide decks, because that's what I'm most used to. Because that's what my consumers are used to, what my customers are used to. but it serves well for paper documentation if you're creating written documents as well. But keep it short and sweet. One of the examples I had here was from a survey that I did not too long ago. As a background, we did a survey in 2018, asking certain questions. Due to COVID, we wanted to see how much these answers may have changed. So our research goals: understand why travelers do the following 3 things. Short and sweet, but that gives you the background and you know where you're coming from. And then tell the story about what you learned. And I like to use what I call the content sandwich. I looked up this quote. This particular wording is attributed to Dale Carnegie. There are articles out there with tons of references to this, from everyone as far back as Aristotle to several preachers to authors, and I chose the wording from Dale Carnegie. Who knows who said it first? But basically, give them an idea of tell them what you're going to say it, and tell them what you've said. So that you give them an idea of what to look for, you tell them the details, and then you say, oh yeah, this is a reminder of what I told you. And the way I like to do that in my research report is give them an executive summary, then go into the detailed findings, and then give a summary of the findings to remind them of the key points, so that they have those takeaways at the top of their mind when they finish. And here's an example. 4 bullet points of things that went well in this study, 1 suggested improvement. This was actually one of the better usability test results that I've had. But it's short and sweet and just lets you know, hey, this is what we're going to talk about. And the challenge, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I like to deliver my reports via a meeting as well and talk through it. The challenge is that some people are going to want to dive into the details right here, particularly if they're contentious. So that's where your facilitation skills come in to say, we're just talking high-level topics right now. We're going to get to the details in a moment. And speaking of details, then you get to the details. And I like to tell them in a logical order, weaving them together so they tell some sort of story. If I've done a lot of interviews, I'll likely summarize it by key themes. Here were some key themes that I heard: 1, 2, 3, 4. If it makes sense, I'll order things chronologically. When people plan travel and then they decide to purchase travel, there's a little bit of logic to that order. They tend to look for things, they browse them, they compare them, and then they make purchase decisions. So sometimes there's that chronological task flow that makes logical sense to order things in. Often stages in a customer journey map are great for that. Or a product screen flow. As you go through doing a particular task on your screens, 1 screen at a time. Or sometimes comparative designs. Design A, then design B, then design C. It all depends on your context. And really what you want to do is help the audience connect the dots. I like to state a key theme, which is a summarized version of what we heard, and then provide the supporting objective data. And here's where my former boss, Dan Berlin, really beat it into me. Not literally, of course, just figuratively. But you want to make sure that you're getting objective data and documenting what you see participants do and what participants say. We don't say participants think this is good, because we don't know what they think. We know that they said that, they mentioned these things. One of the other things I like to do is, participants notice this. Well, we don't know that either unless you're doing eye tracking. But if you show them a page, ask them what they think about it, and 9 out of 10, without prompting, mention a particular element, you know that that is getting noticed fairly well. So focus on your objective data, and I always trust what they do over what they say, because I'm sure everyone has had somebody stumble in a usability study not be able to do something very easily and then say, oh, that was a piece of cake. So trust what they say first. I mean, trust what they do first and then what they say. And I like to show my learnings and my findings in a variety of ways. I think because we have such a diverse audience of our research reports and a diverse type of data and sets of data, there's a lot of different ways that we can visualize this. And let's use our user experience visualization skills, as basic as some of mine are to a little bit more advanced. I'm sure some of you are, but let's use them to their best advantage as appropriate. So I want to show you just some examples of some of the things that I've done. How would you describe this website? Having people provide different words or choosing words from a list if you're using the Microsoft product cards technique. You can create a word cloud. There's a lot of them online, fairly easy. The larger words have been mentioned more often. Okay. Quotes. Quotes can be very powerful, particularly when they're supporting those key themes that I talked about. So, no participants had issues with payments. All participants said, notice that they loved skipping the checkout line. This was an app to go through a warehouse club and pay on your phone rather than standing in line. So, they said they love skipping it, but you know what? It's kind of weird to skip checkout. It feels like we're stealing stuff, but we're not. That could be something you want to keep in mind. But then also the app is sweet. It saves you time on the back end. So that's supporting that particular theme. And I like the call out of the quotes. You can use your visual treatment of choice, but I do like to make sure that the quotes are a little bit more visually prominent, so it's clear that that's a direct quote. And I always say which participant number that relates to. And we'll talk about participant profiles in a little bit. I've moved that to the end. Photos are very powerful as well. If you're going out in the field, if you're dealing with physical products, showing photos to show context and what's happening can really convey a lot. As you know, picture's worth 1,000 words. In this particular case, I was working for an insulin pump manufacturer in the medical device space. And we wanted to come up with a new case to carry our product along with other things that that people with diabetes need, such as their insulin, such as their test strips, things like that. So we had people bring in all of their cases and show us exactly what they used. Some used ones that were provided by the manufacturer, others used very inconspicuous ones. Some were cosmetically fun for them. Some were specifically made for that product, for organization. It was a variety. And likewise, videos can be very powerful in your research reports, particularly with online research. I tend to not use too many videos because it can get a bit overwhelming for your audience to watch. Also, some of your audience is not going to watch the videos, particularly if you've got busy executives. I've been in a presentation, I had a 30-second video. They're like, no, skip it. So that's why I always have a brief description of the video content on the left. So when I'm presenting to the executives, they say, oh no, skip the video. I can tell them in 1 or 2 sentences exactly what they're missing. And also when you come back and read the report later, when you're that future user and you're coming back and looking at it, you can read it and understand it without taking the time to watch the video. Always make sure autoplay is off. And when they do play it, make sure that the clips are short. 30 seconds is a long time, but it'll use your judgment. Sometimes you can make it a little bit longer if it's really a very powerful video. Some data lends itself to tables. So I'm also a big fan of minimal design and emphasizing the data, letting the data jump out, as I did here. So I had 3 participants. I had 6 tasks. For each task, they either passed it, they failed it, or I gave them an assist. Very quick at a glance, you can tell there were 4 assists, 4 fails. Everybody failed task 5. Everybody, all the others were passed. So this can be a really good way to summarize things or show tables of numerical data. Again, I would like to call out generally the highs and the lows. I like to use color. The green red seems to work very well for our Western audience, to show, hey, here's a strong negative, here's a strong positive. These are the ones we should focus on. Or maybe sometimes it's the ones that there's a larger difference. So maybe I'll have variable A, variable B, value A, value B, and then here's the difference showing, uh-oh, this is going up a lot, this one's going down a lot. Historically, this is a problem. Graphs, again, minimal design, labeling axes and legends, showing the data values. I learned this one the hard way. We had a survey from the previous team that was done in 2018, and management said, we want you to redo this survey and show us exactly how the questions values in answer values changed. And I had to sit there and look at it and go, is that a 61 or a 62? Because they didn't label them. So please label them. Your future self will thank you. Another graph. One of the things that I like to do with graphs that I didn't do in the previous one is add an interpretation. In this case, this is system usability scale average scores. For those of you who have used SUS, you know that the score, I believe, is between 0 and 100. I know 100 is the high. I'm 100%, I'm not 100% sure, but pretty sure. This one was 79.5. What is my executive going to do with that? They don't know what a 79.5 means. Because if you've worked with the SUS, you know that the distribution of values isn't necessarily linear. So what you can't necessarily say, oh, a 60 is this, a 50 is that, without looking at answers from large numbers of data and being able to figure it out. So what I was able to do is figure out through some great work from Jim Sorrow that a 79.5 is roughly equivalent to a B+. 72 is a C, thank you. The person who mentioned that in chat. So I was able to communicate that to the executives and this, oh, we want our product to be better than a B+. So we know that we have some work to do. And Phil Cordham from Rice University has a great paper. Awesome, I'll check that out. Thank you for that tip. Another thing that I do a lot, particularly for user research reports from usability testing, is take screenshots and give callouts. And I think this is the question somebody was asking earlier around, here's an issue. I have no problem with you then saying recommendation and completing that right there. Because that way, if it's a one-to-one correlation, you can see it here, describe it, say, here's what I recommend doing. As long as you've gone through that process of thinking through your interpretation and your recommendation, I think that's fine. And I have had a lot of positive comments on the call out finding technique saying, here's exactly where the issue is. Designers particularly enjoy that. Questions, comments on the communicate section. Lots of details there, but different ways of visualizing things.
You know, Susan, I had one question. When you're presenting the objective data for a very small study, like you only talk to 6 people, do you prefer to call out, only 2 out of 6 did this or 3 out of 6, or do you just prefer to use terms like several or most or the majority, things like that?
Yeah, I've gone back and forth over my career. My current preference is to talk numbers, say 2 out of 6 did this. The reason that I like to do that is it reminds my audience that we only talk to 6 people. Right now, my executives are coming from an analytics background, so they're used to big numbers. And if I say 2/3, they're going to extrapolate to 2/3 of our entire user population, which I know isn't true. So I like to do that. I will also call out if 1 out of 6 said this, but I think this has particular weight because it's a severe issue. Or this seems like this could cause a particularly bad problem for the user to try and recover from. Mm-hmm. I will add those kind of statements to emphasize that it's probably worth more than just a 1 out of 6.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Susan, how do you decide which methods to use when? And I think, like, it seems to me that if you used all of these methods in one report, it could feel really cluttered, especially to like an executive. How do you pick and choose what to use when?
That's a great question. And as always in user experience, it depends. You know, I had to say that. Screenshots and callouts I use almost all the time in usability test reports because that makes just a lot of sense due to what I'm testing. Surveys, I like to use graphs. I use simple bar graphs, no need for 3D stuff, keep the design simple, let the data talk. Summaries like this, I only use when I feel that I need to show a 10,000 foot view. Videos, I don't use too often unless I did a remote study. We use usertesting.com, and I heard a particularly good quote. I had somebody say they saw something on the screen and they said, bingo, that's exactly what I've been looking for. If I saw that, I'm going to be purchasing today. That video clip went in my report. It doesn't get better than that. Photos, normally just for ethnography studies or things that are a physical product, which I did a lot of at my last company. They become your alternative to screenshots in the physical product world. Quotes I use all the time. Always take notes when I watch the videos or during a session. Quotes from me are the easiest thing for me to include to show a flavor of what the user really is saying and conveying. And word clouds, only if I have a particular question, I'm trying to get a vague feeling of how they would describe something. In this case, it was, we were looking at a visual design, how would you describe it? So I think it really depends on what it is you're studying, but it's nice to have that toolkit of options. And don't be afraid to come up with a new one. Because sometimes you do. I hope that helped.
It did, thanks.
Okay. Why don't we move on to interpret? So now that we've explained what we learned, what does it mean? Because that's what they want to hear at the end of the day. So what does interpret mean? Of course, being the scientist that I am, I had to go look it up in the dictionary. I was channeling my mother, who used to always tell me to do that. To explain the meaning of something is really what interpret means. And to me, I think the key things are that you have to explain using the language and concepts that are familiar to your audience. It's almost a translation in a way. I don't know how many of you work with engineers. Sometimes they get so excited and they tell you something that they've told me something I can't understand. said, well, we read your spec, we like what you designed, we can't do that, but we can do blah, 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 blah. And I just look at him and say, okay, can you do me a favor and say that again in English? And they usually laugh, but then they tell me in common words they know I understand. That's what we need to do about our data, because we're so ingrained, we're so invested in the data we've collected that we know a lot of this stuff, but we need to communicate that clearly to others in a way that they can understand it. So how do we focus our interpretation? We're all familiar with this Venn diagram of user needs, business needs, technology constraints, whatever you want to call it, the technical sphere. I want to focus on this blue area in here where they overlap, because that's where we need to bridge. That's what we need to communicate. So to the executives, we need to talk in business language, which often involves money. To designers, we need to do those call outs of the screenshots of what they designed, saying, this is a problem here, and here's why. The data analysts, this is what we're hearing. So this may be indicating why they're behaving a certain way. And I realized as I was thinking about how do I interpret things, that I think there's 4 steps into how my brain thinks through these things. And I hope this can help you understand that too, because I found particularly researchers that may be newer to the field sometimes struggle a little bit with interpretation. But what I like to do is try to understand the desired user behavior. So what I mean there is, for example, we sell tours and activities. What do we want people to do? We want people to buy things. That's our business model, people buying things. So that's the desired user behavior. What's the actual behavior? Well, some percent of people that see a product page on our website don't click that button. We only get X% of people actually clicking that button and purchasing. So that's that contrasting that desired versus actual. And then you want to explore possible reasons for that difference. Well, why aren't they buying? Is it because they haven't heard of Viator before and don't know if they can't trust us? Is it because this isn't the right product for them and they're leaving the page to go find a better product? Is it because they're still researching their travel and they're not ready to buy it today, but they're going to come back? All possible reasons for that difference. And then you can start to make recommendations to achieve what you wanted them to do to buy it. So what could we do if, for example, that reason they don't trust us, what could we do to improve the trust so that they would be willing to buy with us? So here's just another example. I just picked on a particular health insurance website. If we imagine that I have I'm a member of Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, I have a plan with them, I need to know what is covered under my health insurance plan. What does the business want the user to do in this case? Any ideas? I don't know if you can see the screen, but there's a member login button. The business wants the user to click the member login button. Why? Any ideas why the business wants them to click the member login button? You can type it in the chat. Track engagement. Yeah, that's one reason. Make sure what's covered, make sure they're a customer, authenticate. All good reasons, show applicable benefits, potentially upsell, conversion, all sorts of great ideas. The alternative, if I need to know what is covered, the alternative to logging in and finding it out is exactly what Rachel just said, self-service instead of calling. There's also a contact us button here. So if I log in, I can find out by myself, and that's cheaper for the business as opposed to calling and incurring a cost for the call center. So what if we found in testing or in data analytics that a lot of users are clicking contact us and contacting the call center? What are some of the possible reasons for that? I can think of a few. One, this member login button isn't very prominent. It's got a very light gray border to it, but my eye goes directly to learn more. So maybe that's why people are not. Maybe the need is urgent, as Sherry said. So maybe that's why they're calling to get an immediate answer. It's not clear what benefit you get from the member login button, as somebody else said in chat. That's true. It might be hard to log in because some processes are hard. Maybe they forgot their password. Some people just want a human. And it may also be the case, and I'm making this one up, but maybe they're not a native English speaker and they have better phone support for their native language than they do on the website. Or accessibility issues as well. So there's all sorts of different issues. And then based on what you find of those, you can make recommendations. So maybe making that button more visually prominent is one thing to consider doing. Or consider adding a section explaining login to see personalized benefits, because that's telling you what the value of logging in is. And if you're finding that a lot of folks are using the non-English options that you offer in the call center, perhaps you can think about how might we make English language learners more comfortable using our website. So there's a variety of recommendations that you could come up with depending on that context. So being meta here, looking at my last slide as an example, what I like to do when I word recommendations is I like to be concise. I describe what, not how. You notice I said make the member login button more visually prominent. I didn't say make it red. Leave that up to the design team to figure out what the appropriate thing is, but you're saying what has to happen. I often, if I don't know if this is going to be a suggestion that the team is going to go with, I may suggest something and say, consider doing this. That helps soften it a little bit. It gives them the idea to take it or leave it, but that may be an option. Also, sometimes I like to do some brainstorming afterwards around how might we. So I do tend to like asking those types of questions as well. And keep in mind that considering additional research to better understand behavior can always be an option. I don't like to put it in every single report, but there are times if you just can't understand what's going on, that may be the best recommendation, that if this is an issue we need to drive to conclusion, we need to understand things better. And there are times when I need to make the recommendations a little bit more convincing to help influence others, to help persuade them a little bit. Sometimes I can point out the implications of making or not making the suggested change. So for example, with that contact us option, if we're finding that a lot of people are doing the contact us option, we can say making these suggested changes will reduce contacts to our contact center, decreasing costs. And perhaps work with the product management team and the analytics team to say, can we get an estimate of how much we think this is going to move the needle and what dollar value are we comfortable putting on that? Executives may be more likely to listen to, or very often more likely to listen to dollar amounts. Another thing that we can do is use severity rating scales for each finding. That really helps teams prioritize which ideas, which issues to address. hey, this is a high priority finding. Here's the 2 or 3 recommendations I have here. I think this one's going to move the needle more. That can help you persuade your audience a bit more. And who should create recommendations? I've had this discussion at other companies where I've worked where people didn't think that researchers should make recommendations. We should just report out what we did and what we learned. I think it depends on the team dynamics, the expectations of the research team from the business, the researcher knowledge and experience. But what I found is that collaboration options are always available. Oftentimes I will discuss research findings with the product manager to better understand what it is they want people to do. And that helps me reframe the suggestions to be more palatable to the business team. I may review the findings with the designer and product manager, and then we can collaborate on the recommendations. There's no reason that they can't help think of solutions as well. We're all a team. And sometimes, like I said, I phrase recommendations as how might we to hold a brainstorming workshop after delivering the report, so that we can be much more collaborative as a cross-functional team to come up with a solution. That tends to work for bigger issues, but the first 2 are generally better for more detailed findings. Questions or comments on that section? And then I've got just a real quick wrap up.
Not a question, I guess just a comment in saying that I appreciate you highlighting or attempting to answer the question of who should make recommendations. I've definitely been in a scenario before where it was, there was an alignment or agreement as to whether or not recommendations should be made following a research effort. So it's good to hear that just hear your perspective on it. So thank you.
Okay, sure. And actually in my current position, that was one of the reasons I was hired. There was a single researcher who would just say, here's what people did. And the product team was like, so what do we do about it? And they couldn't articulate that. So one of the reasons they brought me in was to help build the team, help mentor that individual. And then we started establishing, here's what we recommend. And that has served the product team well. They don't always listen to us, but they're starting to listen to us a little bit more, which makes me feel good. Just keeping an eye on time, I do want to wrap up. I've got a couple more slides. The end of the research report is where I like to put some additional information in an appendix. Participant profiles, methodology overview, and links to supporting documents. I used to put the participant profiles and methodology overview in at the beginning, because to me as a researcher, that tells the logical story. I recently listened to Mike Ryan's presentation from UXPA Boston, and he was doing a one-pager, a talk about a one-page document deliverable. And he did some research and found that the audience generally doesn't care about these as much. So that's why I've now moved it to the end. I do like to document it. So participant profiles, real basic stuff that you probably know. Anonymous profiles. At the top, I list the common characteristics of who we talk to. And then these columns are whatever we deem relevant for that particular study. So that can vary. But the key is making sure that things are anonymous. Method, I like to do just a few bullet points to say, here's what we did. Here's how we recruited. We recruited 10 participants who were doing this. We had them do these 2 tasks. Then they answered with verbal responses. And at the end, I like to show related documents. Here's the interview guide. For the folks that maybe your future self and you want to recreate the study to see how things have changed, you can go back to your original interview guide. Or if somebody reading this wants to know exactly what question was asked, they can do that. And I also like to have links to my session notes so that I can go back and find additional data if I need to. So to review, our goal is to learn about our user, help my team learn about users so we can improve our product by influencing our team. So I hope that this method of learning how to communicate and interpret and making recommendations helps you articulate things better and make more, improve your influence in your organization to help make your product better. So I want to thank you for your time. I'll take any last questions. And I'll answer the first question. This is my kitty Hazel. I've had her for 4 years now. She's a sweetheart.
Thank you so much, Susan. And I wanted to ask, while we're waiting for more people to ask questions, do you ever find yourself having to write a report in a Word document anymore, or is it strictly just slides?
The last time I wrote in a Word document was about 4 years ago, 4.5, when I worked at the medical device company, and I had to write a summary of all our usability studies as part of an FDA submission. So outside of that, I have not written a Word document. With maybe one exception of a very quick study we had to turn around like in 3 days. I just wrote a very brief summary just to have something to go back to later.
I've seen the same thing. I don't think I've used Word in forever for a report, which is awesome. I'm super happy about that. I hope we don't go back to that. I'm happy to do this instead. I think the more visual, the better. So I really like this. And it's just easier to throw it in a deck for some reason than to mess with Word and its crazy formatting.
I agree.
Okay, so we do have another question here. Amrita, am I saying your name correctly? What do you do when you have overconfident designers, executives who know the answers before you can do the research?
I've never encountered that.
Sorry, that's the right way to pronounce my name. Okay. But really?
No, that was heavy.
My leg.
That was heavy sarcasm implied, of course. Sometimes, depending on the issue. If it's a minor thing, I may not choose to fight that battle. If it's a big thing, I would say, well, if you want to go ahead and start planning on it, let's get research in parallel. And maybe they'll start designing something, but I think we can get research before we start building anything. And the engineering tends to be the most expensive part. So I will sometimes push back and say, let's do the research in parallel. And particularly if I have strong instincts that it's the wrong thing to do. And there have been 1 or 2 times in my current role where we've got the research back and we're like, oh yeah, this doesn't seem to be resonating with users, or this is a problem. And they've already started a little bit on development. So then they have to make the tough call of what to do. But I try not to burn bridges, but part of me in the back of my head is always saying, I told you so, but I never say that out loud.
Thank you. I think we have a very empathetic audience here who's been in the situation that you just illustrated. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
And Oscar wrote a question before about when you were showing the task completion table, he wanted to know why you don't consider an assist as a fail.
In that particular scenario, I wanted to call out that by explaining what a particular term meant users were able to complete the task once they knew what that term meant. So it turned out to be a language problem on the website. They were using very technical language that the users were not familiar with. Once I translated it to them, oh, now I understand what you want me to do, fine. So that's why I called that one out. I think it depends on the situation, whether you want to use an assist or not.
All right. And then 4 had a question on UX repositories or UX research repositories. Are they worth the effort and administration? Should you not bother? Some say the current problems are always out there to find and study. No need to story them.
Yeah, that could be its own talk. But I'll answer briefly. We did try to use Dovetail as a design repository, a design research repository on my team about 2.5 years ago. What we found is it uses, the workflow in that particular tool was you would put in your notes, tag them, and then based on the tags, you can group them together into insights. We found that using that process in the tool at that time in their older UI, which I think they have evolved, was slowing my team down. And that my team was able to get to the insights and report faster. And then they were going back into Dovetail to put the data in afterwards. And we decided that wasn't worth it. What we're looking at now is a different approach. What we did is in the intermediate term, the last 1.5 years, we've created a Confluence page where we just keep a history of here's our research reports. Here's the title with the link to the report. Here's a brief description, the researcher that did it, the month and date. And then we just keep it chronological. So we have everything in one place, but it's not easy for users to find. We're now looking at a tool called Notion that other parts of our organization have started using. That's more of a visual surface layer on top of that. That can allow us to say, here's a research report, here's a very brief summary, here's some tags, and here's the topic it relates to. And then when you search, it can search for the title of the project and the tags. So that we can find, here's a report that was fully on that topic, but also here's 2 other reports that had that topic included in it. So we're just starting to explore that. I think that model is going to make more sense for our particular needs at this time.
That's such a good point. I found myself with repositories, some of my clients have them, and it's just such a long process going back to the repository. It does slow you down. And a lot of them want you to code transcripts, which personally I would rather just die. Like that's just the worst. And I don't know, how do you feel about transcripts? Do you for me personally, I find that a lot of times the findings aren't verbalized. It's what they did, not what they said. And I'm looking for it in the transcript and I don't see it. My notes seem to be more valuable.
Yeah, we were using transcripts when we went into Dovetail. So we would transcribe the audio, put it into Dovetail. There was an awful lot of corrections because no automatic transcription tool is perfect. We couldn't afford the manual transcription. And you're right. I think trying to go through all the whatever noise that's in there and then finding that particular verbatim quote to tag was a lot of work, as opposed to the way that I prefer to take notes. I tend to type almost real time the key phrases that I hear from them. And I'm able to pick out, oh, this is important. I want to jot that down. Through 10 years of experience, it's hard to get there, but it's valuable.
My team recently well as the team I was on previously, we started using Mural to take notes in, and we really liked that. And I'm doing that again in my current role. We use Miro there, but same idea. And I find that it's similar. It forces you to kind of take that similar approach that you just described, Susan, of more like key statements, sentiments. And then often if I'm a note taker, I will, if there is something that's being discussed that's really, you know, flags are going up in my head, I'll look down at the recording and timestamp, like, you know, put a sticky note that actually says, you know, what the timestamp is. And if I see a timestamp in my sticky notes, I know to go back and listen and you know, kind of parse more deeply what the insights might be.
That's a great idea. Personally, I prefer the Excel spreadsheet method that I've been taught. That's what I've learned, but I know some of my team loves using sticky notes, and some are doing it digitally now. So I'm a fan of finding what works for you, because everybody's brain and you know, works a little bit differently. So find what works for you that enables you to see the information in the way you need to see it to come up with those insights, and then document that.
All right, any other questions? I'm not seeing any other in the chat. Any other comments? Okay, Sherry says, what cases have you used the repositories for?
Oh, I see there's been a bunch of chat on research repositories in the chat.
Yeah, so yeah, Sherry asked, what cases have you used the repositories for?
For me, we were just trying to put our research in one place to make it easy for our team members to find the answers. The product managers were working more closely with our data analysts. You know, as project managers start working on a new area, what research do we have that relates to reviews, for example? So they can start to see what are the issues there. They can come up with hypotheses that we can then investigate further if need be. Just being able to find things like that by topic is really what we're looking for right now.
And Lynn had a great question here. Would love to hear how you respond to stakeholders who say 6 participants is not enough to base decisions on.
Yes, that's a great point. That's why I love working with our analytics team, because often we can get a hint as to what's or why things are happening, but we can also look at an analysis of large numbers of people coming to our site and what the behavior is. So the idea is your analytics is going to tell you what people do at scale that executives are going to buy. They're going to understand that, at least my executives do, because that's where they came from in the business. And our research with small numbers tells us the why, helps us tell the story of what's going on behind that. So a lot of times we do research that uncovers things with 2, 3, 6 people. That isn't enough for us to change the direction of our product, but it should be a signal, you know, a signal flag from a boat that, hey, there's an issue here. Let's go look at the actual user data, the analytics data. Let's go look at our purchasing behavior. Can we come up with an A/B test where we can get significant numbers to prove out our hypothesis here? That's really the power that we have. So when they say 6 isn't enough, you know, a story that I heard a long time ago that I like to retell to them even is, if they're an executive and there's a rug outside their office and somebody comes and the rug gets bunched up, somebody walks by and trips over it, are you going to wait for 100 people to come and trip before you fix the rug? No, it's a signal that something's wrong. That's pretty obvious. You should fix it, or at least investigate it further.
All right, any other questions or comments for Susan?
Oh, Catherine. I just want to say thank you to everyone who has come and participated, listened, participated in the chat. I'm very heartened to see a lot of names that I recognize in the chat, and excited to see some that I don't know. So, I hope you guys have learned about some things and have some ideas to take back to work and think through and figure out which of these tips may work for you and which may not. And come up with some other iterations and come back next year and talk to this group again and tell them what you've learned.
Thank you so much, Susan. Again, this is awesome. I think I always take away something new whenever I hear you talk. So I'm always glad that you can do that.
Thanks for having me.
Agreed. Thank you. This is great.
And everybody, please keep in touch with us. I sent some links in the chat. Trying to do that again here. We're on Slack. We're on Facebook. Again, our next meeting is on November 18th. There we go. There's some links for us if you want to join our email list, stay notified of our events. And Christine, I love your cat. I see you. Well,
She loves UX. Can't stay away.
Well, it was great to see everyone's faces and see everyone join, and I hope you can join us for the next one as well. We will be sending out the recording as soon as possible for this. All right. Thank you, Susan.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.